All right, I'm going to do a little video for you on how I am going to cut my fabrics. I got my pattern here. I did a separate video if you're making the fat quarter version, fat quarter friendly version. The instructions are in the email, hopefully, that this video also came in for making the fat quarter friendly version. But I will be making the pattern as written. This way is faster, and so I like it better. But if you want to make it the other way, if you want to follow the instructions for the fat quarter friendly version, you will avoid having to cut your blocks into quarters. So even if you aren't using fat quarters, you can follow the block instructions for that version, and you'll avoid that stuff. All right, so I have, anyway, in the fat quarter friendly cutting video, I showed how to cut fabric using both my 8.5 by 24.5 big ruler, which I use most of the time, and a stripology ruler. So if you want to see how I use my stripology ruler, watch that video. But I'm going to just show you using my regular ruler, since I know that's what most people are going to use here. So I have 3 fabrics, an A, B, and a C, and I'm going to show you how I cut my pieces from them. So notice in the pattern, I need a 9-inch square for fabric A, and then I need these other pieces. So from each of my fabrics, A's, there are 7 because I'm making the lap version, I need to cut a 9-inch square. And then total from all the other fabrics, I need to cut these pieces. So I don't need to cut these from each fabric, just, from the leftovers. So I will probably cut 1 to 2 pieces from each fabric. And those will be used for the corner blocks, which you don't make for the baby size version, but for the lap and twin size version, they were just a little bit more fabric efficient to make your blocks that way, and it avoided you having to make a whole nother big square and end up with extra pieces. So anyway, that's what that's about. So I'm going to cut my 9-inch square, and I'm going to get out a square ruler. Recently I upgraded to this absolutely giant 16.5-inch Creative Grids ruler, which has been really handy to have for squaring up my quilt when I finish quilting, because I use it to trim the corners. So what I'm gonna do is, if I can move this back. All right, I'm going to cut, you can just cut a 9, you can cut the side and the top, but I prefer to just cut a big 9-inch strip, and then I'll show you what I mean. I think it's a little more efficient to do it this way. So I've cut my piece here, and I have more than 9 inches over here. So I'm going to make sure this is 9 inches. Here I'm lining up this edge with the 9-inch line on my ruler, and I'm going to cut here. So this side is now 9 inch. Now I need to make this side. I just feel like you get a little bit more of a better square if you do it this way. Oh. Okay, I'm using these horizontal, oh, you can't see, these horizontal hash lines to line up the edge of my block. Trim this end edge, and I'm going to trim I've got my 9-inch square, and now I'm going to cut one of my extra pieces. I'm going to set it over here so it's not in the way. I'm going to cut, I don't know, a 3.5 by 8.5 inch piece from here. So I'm just going to cut a 3.5 inch strip from my fabric. That's 3.5 inches. Now I need to cut it down to 8.5 inches. And definitely, like, before you start cutting fabric, press your fabrics, because you will get better results. So I just trimmed that edge so that that edge was squared up, and now I'm going to cut it down to 8.5 inches. So always when I'm cutting, I make sure that the horizontal hash marks line up with the edge, and then this lines up with the 8.5 inch, and that makes sure that my corners are 90-degree angles. So then with fabric A. Okay, fabric B is going to be this yellow print, which I love, which I had a bunch of at one point, and now I'm down to this. So what I need are 2 3.5 inch by 11 pieces and 2 3.5 inch by 17 inch pieces. So, okay, so what I'm gonna do is, I know 17 plus 17 is 34, plus 11 is plus 22 is longer than the width of the fabric. So I'm gonna keep using my square ruler just because it's here. So I'm gonna cut 2 3.5 inch pieces for my fabric, and you'll notice this fabric is directional, but I kind of like it if, when I have a corner like this, let's see, if I have the stripes go this way and then I have the stripes go down. But if you want your fabric to be directional, just take that into consideration when you're cutting your fabric. Okay, I'm gonna cut a 3.5 inch strip, and I need 2. And if you are using a fat quarter, because your fat quarter is not as wide as this fabric, this is because this is a full width, you need to cut 4 strips. But because this is twice as wide, I only need to cut 2. So if you're using a fat quarter, you probably need to cut 4. Unless your fat quarter is more than 22 inches, then you could get away with 3. But just cut 4. Okay, so I have this much of this precious fabric left over that I've had for years and that I love. Okay, so I need to cut 2 17 inch pieces and 2 11 inch pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the 11 inch first. This is still folded in half, so I will only need to cut 1 time. So I'm going to cut my 11 inch pieces. And if you are cutting from fat quarters, you'll need to cut 1 of the pieces from each strip. Not from, you can't do 2 at a time like this. Okay. So I ended up with 2 3.5 by 11, since that was folded in half. So I'm gonna set those aside. Now I need to cut my 17 inch pieces. Okay, I can't use my square because it's 16.5 inches, but I can use my long ruler turned sideways. So that's what I'm gonna do. And if you're using fat quarters, just take 1 3.5 inch by width of fabric strip and cut 1 17 inch piece, and then do another one. Okay. Hold on. I want to line up my vertical or my horizontal marks with my fabric. Okay, so squared up that edge, and then I'm going to flip it over and cut 17 inches. Okay, so I'm done cutting fabric B. Fabric C. I don't have a lot of green, so I wanted to make sure that I used this print in a more prominent location, and since fabric C is larger, that's what I'm doing. So this one, recipe, the pattern calls for 1/3 of a yard, so you should have a full width of fabric. Oh, I'm gonna fall over while I make this video. So this is a little bit more than 1/3 of a yard, but you get the idea. It's just what I had. I think it's half. So I need, for this, 2 3.5 by 19 inch and 2 3.5 by 25 inch. So I should be able to cut the 2 19 inch from the same with the fabric strip. So I should need 3. Okay, sorry, I'm getting texts about my son at a birthday party. Okay, so I'm gonna cut. See, I'm lining up these horizontal lines with the edge of my fabric, and then I'm leaving more than 3.5 inches over here so that I can flip this over and trim it down to 3.5 inches and square up the edge. Okay, now I need 2 more, and it should be pretty square, but I'm still making sure that my horizontal lines line up with the edge of my fabric so that I make sure that it's still squared up. Okay. Now, depending on the fabric that you're using, you may not be able to get 2 of the 19-inch pieces from your width of fabric. Your fabric would have to be, that would be unusual, because you should be able to get 38 inches from a width of fabric. But if for some reason you cut some random piece off and forgot about it. Okay, so I'm going to use my 8.5 by 24.5 inch turned sideways, and I'm just going to make sure that I have 19. I have well over 19 inches here, so I'm going to square up the edge right there, and then I'm going to carefully, because this is kind of long and unwieldy, turn it over, and then I'm going to cut. Sorry if my camera is kind of shaking. It's like every time I move, it moves with me. Line up your horizontal lines with the edge of your fabric and cut 19 inches. So there we go. We've got our first 2 pieces. Okay, so now we need 25.5 inch pieces, and this ruler is only 24.5 inches long. So what we're going to do is I'm going to open up my fabric. Now, you can use the cutting mark on your cutting mat, the marks on your cutting mat. I don't recommend it unless you aren't that concerned about accuracy. For this pattern, I don't recommend it. But if you don't have another ruler option, you can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, it's going to be really hard to show this on the camera but I'll do my best. Okay, I just put these 2 strips on top of each other, and I made sure they were lined up nicely. So see, they're just stacked together, so I can cut them at the same time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have this 4-inch wide ruler. Okay, so I'm going to use that over here, and then what do I need to add to 4 to get to 25? 21, right? So I'm going to line up my horizontal lines on here so that I make sure I have 90-degree angles. I'm going to put these rulers right up against each other, make sure that I have at least 21 inches over here. Okay, let's see if I can't get that right there. Okay, so I'm trimming this off. This was my extra. That will go in the scrap bin. And then I'm going to do that again. 20, I'm going to line up the 21. I'll show you in a minute. It's my camera. It's not pointing at it. I'm going to use my 4-inch ruler. I've got it over here. These are right up next against each other, and I have lined up the vertical line with the 21-inch mark on my ruler. Sorry, I need a better setup here. So I'm just making sure everything is straight, and then I'm just gonna think in my head again. Is 4 plus 21 is 25. Okay, measure twice, cut once. Now I've got my other piece, and if you would rather, like, you're going to end up with some of these extra pieces that are 3.5 inch wide, and if you'd rather use those for some of these pieces, that's, oh whoops, be helpful if you could see. If you'd rather use those for some of these, you, instead of cutting them from here, you can actually, like, if you have a generously cut fat 1/8, you can get away with using it for your 9 by 9 inch square. You just have to make sure that it is actually 9 inches wide, and then you can cut these remnants from your other pieces, but you have to make sure you have enough fabric for that, but you could do that. All right, so I have all my pieces cut for one giant block. So I've got my fabric A, oops, scrap, plus my extra corner piece. I've got my fabric B's, and I've got my fabric C's, and then we will do fabric D another day because that's a whole nother thing. So that is cutting.